Ma'am, people in economy don't get to make demands.
Is there anything
The
else I can
sentence
get for
landed
you?
harder than the turbulence. A few passengers looked up. A few smirked. Most pretended not to hear. But Monica
Gate is
Hayes
confirmed
heard
for the
every
connecting
word.
flight. You can
She
proceed
sat
directly to
quietly
gate
in seat
B23.
34A
Thank you
near
so
the wing
much.
of
You're
Aurora
welcome. Thank
Airlines
you very
Flight
much for the water.
728 from Atlanta to Seattle, her tray table folded,
You're
her
welcome.
hands resting calmly in her lap. The
But can I
cabin
have
lights
your
glowed
tech, huh?
softly against the evening sky outside,
I am
and the
authorized.
steady hum of the engines filled the space between uncomfortable silences. The flight had been in the air for just under an hour when the trouble started. Monica had politely asked for a bottle of water after waiting nearly 20 minutes while the beverage cart served everyone around her. The request was simple. The response was not. "Ma'am, people in economy don't get to make demands," said flight attendant Nicole Parker, her smile thin and practiced. A few rows ahead, a well-dressed white passenger wearing a navy blazer chuckled loudly enough for others to hear. "Guess somebody forgot where they're sitting," he said. Several passengers exchanged awkward glances. Monica didn't react. She simply looked out the window. Far below, scattered clouds drifted across the darkening landscape like islands floating in an endless sea. Nicole rolled the cart forward without another word. The moment should have ended there. It didn't. 10 minutes later, when meal service began, passengers on both sides of Monica received their trays. She did not. When she politely asked if there had been a mistake, Nicole sighed dramatically. "We're short on meals," she said. "It happens." The passenger across the aisle frowned. "That's strange," he muttered. "I saw plenty back there." Nicole ignored him. The man in the navy blazer didn't. "Maybe they prioritize people who actually paid for their seats," he joked. A few nervous laughs followed. The air inside the cabin shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. That familiar feeling of someone deciding your value before learning your name. Monica had experienced it before. At 23, at 31, at 47. Different places, different faces. Same assumption. She remained calm. Her expression never changed. If anything, that seemed to bother them more. The man in the blazer stood and adjusted his jacket before turning toward her. "You know," he said, "some people spend their whole lives trying to look important." Nicole laughed softly as she passed. Monica finally met his eyes. "And some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they already are." The man's smile disappeared. Around them, several passengers looked up from their phones. A young woman seated 2 rows back lowered her headphones. Another passenger stopped typing on a laptop. The cabin wasn't asleep anymore. It was watching. Nicole returned moments later carrying a clipboard. "I need to verify your ticket," she said. Monica raised an eyebrow. "Again?" Nicole nodded. "Routine procedure." It wasn't routine. Everyone nearby knew it. Just making sure everything checks out. Monica accepted the ticket without argument. Her composure felt almost unnatural, as if she already knew how the story would end. The man in the blazer leaned back into his seat with a satisfied grin. "Can't be too careful these days." Monica turned toward the window once more. The reflection staring back at her looked calm, patient, impossible to rattle. Outside, the last light of sunset faded beyond the horizon. Inside, the distance between seat 34A and the front of the aircraft suddenly felt much larger than a few rows. It felt like a line people had decided she wasn't allowed to cross. What none of them knew was that Monica Hayes hadn't boarded Flight 728 to reach Seattle. Monica Hayes remained in seat 34A, her posture relaxed, her attention drifting between the dark window and the people around her. To anyone watching, she looked like an ordinary passenger traveling alone. A charcoal sweater, comfortable slacks, a worn leather notebook resting beside her carry-on. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth, influence, or power. That was intentional. Monica had spent years learning how differently the world treated people when status symbols disappeared. No designer labels, no assistants, no reserved entrances, just a person walking into a space and allowing others to reveal who they really were. Together, they painted a different picture. Around them, other passengers had clearly noticed the exchange. Some looked away immediately. Others continued watching. The flight attendants moved through the cabin collecting trash. Nicole Parker passed Monica again without acknowledgement. Everyone else in the row received a routine smile. Monica received silence. The difference was subtle enough to deny, obvious enough to feel. Near the rear galley, a young flight attendant named Emily Torres reviewed inventory numbers on a tablet. She had only been with Aurora Airlines for 11 months and still carried the nervous energy of someone trying to prove herself. As she glanced toward row 34, her eyes lingered on Monica for a second longer than necessary. Something felt familiar. She had seen that face somewhere before. Not on a flight, not in a terminal, somewhere else, somewhere important. Emily frowned and searched her memory. A company presentation, perhaps. A corporate newsletter. A shareholder meeting broadcast. The thought appeared and disappeared before she could fully catch it. Meanwhile, the man in the navy blazer seemed increasingly determined to perform for the audience around him. He leaned into conversations with nearby passengers, speaking loudly enough for Monica to hear. "The problem these days is everyone thinks they deserve special treatment," he announced. "Nobody wants to earn respect anymore." A few people nodded politely. Others stared at their phones. Monica remained silent. She had learned long ago that people often revealed the most about themselves when they believed they were winning. Nicole returned with a stack of forms and stopped beside the man. Their conversation began quietly, but gradually grew louder. "Some passengers create unnecessary complications," Nicole said. "You try to be accommodating, and they still act offended." The man chuckled. "I noticed." Their eyes briefly shifted toward Monica. Neither bothered hiding it. Emily noticed too. The young flight attendant watched from several rows away, discomfort tightening across her face. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not because of a single comment. Because of the pattern. The repeated looks. The repeated assumptions. The repeated need to remind one passenger exactly where she was sitting. Monica opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence across an empty page. "People reveal their character when they think nobody important is watching." Then she closed the notebook, folded her hands, and looked out into the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere ahead lay Seattle. Somewhere ahead lay the truth. And with every passing mile, more people aboard Flight 728 were unknowingly becoming part of a story that would follow them long after the wheels touched the runway. The further Flight 728 traveled through the night sky, the more obvious the pattern became. What had started as small slights now felt coordinated, as if certain people in the cabin had silently agreed on Monica Hayes' place in the social order and were determined to keep her there. The seatbelt sign chimed briefly as the aircraft encountered light turbulence over the Rocky Mountains. Passengers adjusted blankets and returned to their screens. Monica remained calm, her attention drifting across the cabin. She watched people far more than they watched her. That was one advantage of being underestimated. People stopped guarding their behavior. Nicole Parker emerged from the galley carrying a fresh tray of drinks. Several passengers who had requested refills received them immediately. Monica noticed because one of those passengers had asked after she did. When Nicole reached row 34, she continued walking without stopping. The college student across the aisle looked confused. "I thought she asked for water a while ago," he said quietly. Nicole paused just long enough to answer. Some requests take longer than others. Then she walked away. The words were polite. The message was not. The man in the navy blazer smiled into his cup. "Patience is important," he said loudly. "Especially when you are not the priority." A few nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody laughed this time. The atmosphere had changed. People were beginning to notice details they had ignored earlier. A middle-aged woman seated behind Monica leaned forward. "Ma'am, would you like my unopened bottle?" she asked kindly. Monica smiled. "Thank you, but I am all right." The woman nodded but continued watching the crew. So did several others. Near the rear galley, Emily Torres felt a growing knot in her stomach. She had now spent almost 20 minutes trying to remember where she had seen Monica before. During a brief break, she opened a company newsletter on her tablet. The issue highlighted major investors and corporate initiatives. Emily scrolled quickly. Then she stopped. Her eyes widened. The photograph was 3 years old, but the face was unmistakable. Monica Hayes. Emily stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened. She checked again to make sure. Then a third time. The article described a woman whose investments had helped stabilize Aurora Airlines during one of the most difficult periods in company history. Emily looked from the screen to row 34. Back to the screen. Then back again. She suddenly understood why Monica seemed so familiar. What she did not understand was why one of the most influential figures connected to the airline was quietly sitting in economy while being treated this way. Before Emily could process the discovery, another incident unfolded. Nicole returned carrying a clipboard accompanied by a senior flight attendant named Karen Whitfield. Karen was older, more experienced, and known for enforcing procedures with absolute confidence. She stopped beside Monica's seat. "Ma'am," Karen said, "we need to verify your boarding information one more time." Several passengers immediately looked up. Monica raised an eyebrow. This would be the third verification. Karen nodded. "Routine compliance review." The college student spoke before he could stop himself. "Nobody else has been checked 3 times." Karen turned toward him. "Sir, please remain focused on your own travel experience." The response landed like a door closing. Monica slowly handed over her boarding pass again. Karen examined it carefully before returning it. Nicole stood beside her with folded arms. The man in the navy blazer watched with obvious satisfaction. "Good to know security standards still exist," he remarked. This time nobody answered him. The silence itself felt like judgment. Monica accepted the boarding pass and slipped it into her bag. Her expression never changed. Yet inside the cabin, the balance was shifting. More passengers were paying attention. More people were questioning what they were seeing. And at the back of the aircraft, Emily Torres stood frozen beside her service card, holding a company newsletter that suddenly made every decision made on this flight seem far more dangerous than anyone realized. Emily Torres stood motionless near the rear galley, the company newsletter still open on her tablet. The photograph stared back at her. Monica Hayes, investor, board advisor, one of the people credited with helping secure Aurora Airlines during a period when industry analysts openly questioned whether the company would survive. Emily swallowed hard. Her eyes moved from the screen to row 34A again. Monica sat exactly where she had been for most of the flight, calm and composed while conversations swirled around her like weather she had already predicted. Emily felt a wave of disbelief. She had attended a virtual employee town hall 6 months earlier. Senior leadership had discussed customer trust, company culture, and long-term growth. Monica had appeared briefly during the presentation. Emily remembered because she had spoken less than anyone else on the screen, yet somehow commanded the room more than the executives giving the speeches. Now she was sitting 30 feet away being treated like an inconvenience. Emily closed the tablet and looked toward Nicole Parker and Karen Whitfield. Both women were laughing quietly near the galley while organizing service supplies. The sound felt different now. Not harmless. Not professional. Something about it unsettled her. She walked closer. "Can I ask a question?" Emily said carefully. Nicole barely looked up. "Depends on the question." Emily hesitated. "Why are we checking that passengers so often?" Karen answered before Nicole could. "Because sometimes things do not add up." Emily glanced toward row 34. "What exactly does not add up?" Karen zipped a supply bag shut. "Experience." Emily frowned. "Experience?" Nicole finally looked at her. "You are new. You will learn." The answer explained nothing. That was what bothered Emily most. Policies had explanations. Procedures had explanations. Assumptions did not. Meanwhile, the mood in the cabin continued to shift. More passengers were watching. The college student across from Monica had stopped pretending to read. The woman behind her occasionally glanced toward the galley. Even a businessman working on a laptop near row 31 seemed distracted by the repeated interactions. The flight felt smaller now. Every comment carried further. Every decision seemed louder. The man in the navy blazer remained determined to dominate the atmosphere. He leaned into another conversation with a passenger across the aisle. "You can usually tell who belongs where," he said confidently. "People give themselves away." The passenger he was speaking to offered a polite smile, but did not agree. Monica heard the comment. So did several others. Once again, she chose silence. That silence had become its own form of gravity. People kept expecting her to react. She never did. Emily could not stop thinking about it. If she had been treated that way, she would have been frustrated hours ago. Monica simply observed, watched, listened. It was almost as though she were collecting information instead of enduring an unpleasant flight. The realization sent another chill through Emily. Near the front of the cabin, a flight attendant requested assistance with paperwork. Karen headed forward, leaving Nicole behind. Emily took the opportunity. She approached row 34 carrying a bottle of water. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I think this belongs to you." Monica looked up. A small smile appeared. "Thank you." Emily handed over the bottle and lowered her voice. I know who you are. Monica studied her for a moment. There was no surprise in her expression, only calm. Do you? Emily nodded. I saw the newsletter. Monica glanced toward the dark window before returning her attention to the young flight attendant. And what does that change? Emily opened her mouth, then stopped. It was a fair question. Monica's identity did not change what had happened. It only changed how serious the consequences might become. Nothing, Emily admitted. It should not change anything. Monica's smile grew slightly. That is the correct answer. Emily felt something settle inside her. The uncertainty, the confusion. Suddenly, the entire flight made sense. Monica was not here because she needed recognition. She was here because recognition should not be necessary. As Emily stepped away, she noticed several passengers watching the exchange. They could not hear the conversation, but they sensed something had changed. The air felt charged now, like the moment before a storm reaches the horizon. And for the first time since boarding, Emily realized that the people targeting Monica Hayes were not actually in control of this story. They only thought they were. The cabin lights dimmed further as Flight 728 crossed into the final stretch of its journey. Outside, the sky was an endless sheet of darkness. Inside, the tension had become impossible to ignore. What began as subtle disrespect now felt deliberate. Nicole Parker seemed determined to remind Monica Hayes that seat 34A came with limits she had supposedly accepted the moment she boarded. A few minutes after Emily's quiet conversation, another service round began. Passengers nearby received snacks and refreshments. Monica once again found herself overlooked. This time, several people noticed immediately. The woman seated behind her leaned into the aisle. I think you skipped her again, she said. Nicole forced a smile. We are doing our best. The answer satisfied no one. Even the businessman near row 31 lowered his laptop and frowned. The man in the navy blazer, however, appeared energized by the growing discomfort. He shifted in his seat and spoke loudly enough for half the section to hear. Some people spend an entire flight trying to make themselves the center of attention. Monica calmly turned a page in her notebook. Interesting observation, she replied, especially from the loudest person on the plane. A few passengers covered smiles. The man's face tightened. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. But embarrassment quickly turned into irritation. You know what your problem is? He said. You think every inconvenience is personal. The cabin became quiet. The words hung in the air. Monica looked at him steadily. And your problem is that you think every assumption is accurate. Neither raised their voice. Neither needed to. The exchange felt heavier than an argument. It felt like two entirely different views of the world colliding 37,000 feet above the ground. Nicole stepped forward immediately. Sir, there is no need to engage. Yet she directed the comment toward Monica instead of the man who had started the confrontation. Several passengers noticed. Emily noticed too. From the galley, she watched with growing concern. The pattern had become undeniable. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. Karen Whitfield approached, carrying another clipboard. Ma'am, she said, a passenger has raised concerns regarding your seating assignment. The statement triggered immediate confusion. Monica looked up slowly. My seating assignment. Karen nodded. We need to confirm that you belong in this seat. The words landed like a slap of cold air across the cabin. The college student across the aisle stared in disbelief. She has already been checked 3 times. Karen ignored him. Monica remained perfectly still. Around her, passengers exchanged stunned looks. Even those who had remained silent throughout the flight seemed uncomfortable now. Monica accepted the boarding pass request once again. As Karen reviewed the document, a memory surfaced from decades earlier. She was 22 years old, standing in an airport terminal after earning her first major promotion. She remembered the skeptical looks, the extra questions, the quiet assumption that success belonged to someone else. Different airport, different decade, same feeling. The memory lasted only a moment before dissolving back into the present. Karen returned the boarding pass. Everything appears correct. Monica slipped it back into her bag. Imagine that. A few passengers laughed softly. Karen walked away without responding. The atmosphere inside the cabin had changed completely. No longer passive. No longer uncertain. People were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something bigger than a disagreement over service. Monica looked out the window one more time. The city lights of Seattle were beginning to appear far below, glowing like scattered stars across the darkness. The destination was getting closer, and so was the moment when every assumption made on this flight would finally be forced into the light. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing the initial descent into Seattle. Seatbacks returned upright, window shades lifted. The glow of city lights spread beneath the aircraft like a field of gold scattered across the darkness. Around Monica Hayes, passengers prepared for landing, but the tension that had settled over the cabin remained. It felt less like the end of a flight and more like the final minutes before a verdict. Monica glanced at the time on her phone. Then she opened a secure messaging application. Her fingers moved calmly across the screen. The message contained only 6 words. Activate passenger experience audit. Flight 728. Within seconds, a reply appeared. Confirmed. Protocol initiated. Monica locked the phone and placed it back in her bag. Nobody nearby knew that a process years in the making had just begun. Across the aisle, the college student noticed the brief exchange but thought nothing of it. Emily Torres, however, watched carefully from her jump seat assignment. She could not hear what had been sent. She did not need to. Something about Monica's expression had changed. Not dramatically, not enough for most people to notice. But Emily did. It was the look of someone who had reached a decision. Near the front of the cabin, Nicole Parker continued chatting with Karen Whitfield. Neither seemed concerned. The man in the navy blazer appeared equally relaxed. In his mind, the flight was over. The story was finished. Monica had been reminded where she belonged, and everyone would soon go their separate ways. He never considered the possibility that he had misunderstood the story entirely. The aircraft banked gently as it lined up with the runway. Passengers stared out windows. Phones came out of airplane mode. Notifications flooded screens. Monica remained still. Her calmness now seemed almost impossible. The businessman from row 31 finally leaned across the aisle. "Can I ask you something?" Monica turned toward him. "Of course." He hesitated before speaking. "How have you stayed so patient through all of this?" Several nearby passengers quietly listened. Monica smiled. "Because patience and silence are not the same thing." The answer lingered in the air long after she spoke it. Even the college student nodded thoughtfully. A few rows away, the woman who had offered her water earlier smiled to herself. For the first time, people were no longer seeing Monica as a passenger involved in an uncomfortable dispute. They were beginning to see her as the most composed person on the aircraft. Emily felt her respect grow with every passing minute. She remembered the company presentation again. The confidence, the restraint, the ability to command attention without demanding it. Everything matched. The wheels lowered beneath the aircraft. A faint vibration moved through the cabin. Seattle's lights expanded across the windows. Nicole walked one final time through the aisle checking seatbelts. When she reached row 34A, she paused. "I hope the rest of your evening goes smoothly," she said. The words sounded polite, yet something about her tone suggested she believed the matter was over. Monica looked up. "I am certain it will." Nicole smiled and moved on. Emily noticed that answer too. It was not a prediction. It sounded more like a fact. The runway rushed beneath them. Moments later, the aircraft touched down smoothly. A few passengers applauded softly. Others gathered their belongings before the plane had even reached the gate. The familiar routine of arrival began. Yet Monica did not reach for her bag. She simply looked out the window as the aircraft taxied toward the terminal. Her phone vibrated once. Another message. "The board is assembled. Executive team present. Awaiting arrival." Monica read the message and slipped the phone away. Outside, service vehicles moved across the tarmac under bright floodlights. Inside, nobody except Emily understood that Flight 728 had just completed the easiest part of its journey. The difficult part was about to begin. The aircraft finally reached the gate, and the seatbelt sign switched off with a familiar chime. Passengers immediately stood, reaching for bags and jackets, eager to leave after the long flight. Overhead bins opened throughout the cabin. Conversations returned. Phones appeared in nearly every hand. Yet Monica Hayes remained seated. She made no move toward the aisle, no move toward her carry-on. She simply waited. The man in the navy blazer noticed first. "Not in a hurry anymore?" he asked with a smirk. Monica glanced at him calmly. "I have learned that the right moment is worth waiting for." The answer puzzled him. Around them, passengers continued filing toward the front of the aircraft. Nicole Parker and Karen Whitfield stood near the exit thanking travelers as they departed. Their smiles had returned. Their confidence had returned. To them, the flight was complete. Another routine route. Another group of passengers heading home. Emily Torres knew better. She remained near the galley, her attention fixed on Monica. Her heart was beating faster now. She had seen the message arrive. She had seen the composure. Most importantly, she knew exactly who was sitting in seat 34A. One row at a time, the cabin emptied. The businessman from row 31 paused beside Monica before leaving. "For what it is worth," he said, "I think you handled yourself with remarkable grace." Monica smiled warmly. "Thank you." The woman who had offered her water earlier stopped as well. "Safe travels," she said. Monica nodded. "You too." Even the college student lingered for a moment. "I hope things get better," he said quietly. Monica looked toward the front of the aircraft. They will. By now, only a handful of passengers remained on board. The man in the navy blazer collected his briefcase and stepped into the aisle. As he passed Monica, he offered one final comment. "Next time, do not take everything so personally." Monica met his gaze without anger. "Next time, do not assume you know who you are talking to." He laughed dismissively and continued forward. Seconds later, he disappeared into the jet bridge. Emily felt a strange combination of anticipation and concern. Then something unusual happened. Instead of the normal flow of arriving passengers entering the terminal area, a group of people appeared outside the aircraft door. Several wore executive badges. Others carried tablets and folders. Their expressions were serious, professional, focused. Karen noticed them immediately. "What is all this?" she whispered. Nicole frowned. "Maybe a VIP arrival." The group stepped aboard. At their center was Aurora Airlines Chief Executive Officer Daniel Mercer. Beside him stood members of the executive leadership team and representatives from corporate operations. Nicole's eyes widened. Karen immediately straightened her posture. The sudden appearance of senior leadership on an arriving flight was almost unheard of. Daniel Mercer did not greet the crew. He did not stop at the front galley. He did not acknowledge Nicole or Karen at all. Instead, he walked directly down the aisle. Every step seemed to pull the remaining air from the cabin. Emily watched silently. So did the few passengers still gathering their belongings. Daniel reached row 34A and stopped. For one brief second, nobody moved. Then the chief executive officer extended his hand. "Ms. Hayes," he said respectfully, "the board is assembled and waiting for you." The cabin went silent. Completely silent. Nicole froze. Karen's face lost all color. Emily closed her eyes for a moment because she already knew what was coming. Monica stood calmly and accepted the handshake. "Thank you, Daniel," she replied. "I trust everyone received the preliminary report." "Yes," he answered. "Every member of the board." The realization spread through the cabin like a shockwave. The remaining passengers stared in disbelief. Nicole looked from Daniel Mercer to Monica and back again. Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to absolute horror. Monica picked up her carry-on and stepped into the aisle. Then she looked directly at Nicole and Karen. Her voice remained calm. It remained measured. Yet every word landed with unmistakable weight. "You judged me by seat 34A, she said. "The company knows me by something else entirely." No one spoke. No one could. Because in that moment, everyone finally understood that the woman they had spent hours underestimating was not merely a passenger. She was one of the most powerful people connected to the airline they represented. For several seconds, nobody moved. The aircraft felt frozen in time. Nicole Parker stood near the exit with her hands locked at her sides. Karen Whitfield stared at Monica Hayes as though reality had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Even the remaining passengers seemed afraid to break the silence. Daniel Mercer glanced toward the executive team behind him before returning his attention to Monica. "The preliminary findings were reviewed before landing," he said. "The board requested immediate notification the moment you arrived." Monica nodded once. "And the passenger reports?" "Verified," Daniel answered. "More than we originally believed." A shadow crossed several faces in the leadership group. These were not people arriving to greet a respected investor. They were arriving because a problem had become impossible to ignore. Monica looked down the aisle she had spent hours traveling through. Row after row of empty seats stretched behind her. The flight was over. The observations were not. Nicole finally found her voice. "Ms. Hayes, I did not realize. Monica raised a hand gently. The interruption was quiet. It was also final. That is precisely the problem, she said. You did not realize. You did not ask. You decided. The words landed harder than any accusation. Daniel Mercer remained silent. So did everyone else. Monica continued. 3 boarding pass checks. Repeated service delays. Selective treatment. Public assumptions. None of those decisions required anyone to know my name. They only required someone to believe they knew my value. Emily Torres stood near the rear galley listening carefully. The young flight attendant felt both nervous and relieved. For the first time all evening, the truth was being spoken openly. Daniel opened a folder handed to him by a member of corporate operations. The audit team reviewed passenger statements submitted during the flight, he said. Several witnesses independently described the same pattern. Nicole's expression tightened. Karen looked down at the floor. Neither appeared prepared for what was happening. Monica stepped forward. This is not about a single flight, she said. If it were, I would have handled it privately. This is about culture. Culture becomes policy when people stop questioning it. One of the executives nodded quietly. Another took notes. The seriousness of the moment was unmistakable. The man in the navy blazer suddenly appeared near the aircraft doorway. He had apparently noticed the gathering and returned out of curiosity. The confidence he carried throughout the flight vanished the moment he recognized the people standing in the aisle. His eyes widened. Monica saw him immediately. Sir, she said calmly, you spend hours explaining who belonged where. The man looked uncomfortable. I did not know who you were. Monica's response came without hesitation. Exactly. Silence followed. Because everyone understood the meaning behind those 2 words. Daniel closed the folder. Effective immediately, a formal review has been authorized. Nicole's shoulders dropped. Karen's face turned pale. Neither argued. Neither protested. They knew the issue was larger than a single conversation. Larger than a single decision. Monica looked toward Emily. Ms. Torres. Emily straightened immediately. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for remembering that professionalism does not depend on a passenger's appearance. Emily swallowed hard. I was only doing what should have been done. Monica smiled. That is why it mattered. Several executives exchanged approving glances. Leadership could be taught. Character was harder to find. Outside the aircraft windows, baggage vehicles crossed the ramp beneath bright lights. Inside, another kind of accounting was taking place. Not of luggage, not of schedules, of choices. Monica picked up her carry-on and prepared to leave. Before stepping toward the door, she turned back one final time. You thought this flight was testing a passenger, she said. It was actually testing the company. No one answered. No one could, because deep down, they already knew the result. Monica Hayes stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge, followed by Daniel Mercer and the executive team. The noise of the terminal grew louder with every step, but behind her the silence inside the cabin remained. It was the silence that comes when people finally understand the difference between confidence and authority. At the end of the jet bridge, members of the board waited alongside senior leaders from operations, customer experience, and employee development. They greeted Monica with respect, not because of her ownership stake, but because of what she had spent decades building. The woman who had quietly occupied seat 34A was not simply an investor. She was the largest shareholder in Aurora Airlines and one of the people most responsible for its survival during difficult years. Yet none of that was what occupied her mind. As she entered the terminal conference suite prepared for the emergency review, she thought about the passengers. The college student who spoke up when something felt wrong. The woman who offered her water. The businessman who questioned what he was seeing. Emily Torres, who chose integrity over convenience. They reminded her of something important. Culture was never defined by policies alone. It was defined by people willing to act when silence felt easier. Daniel placed a report on the conference table. The review team has already begun collecting statements, he said. Recommendations will be delivered within 48 hours. Monica nodded. Good. But do not focus only on punishment. Several executives looked surprised. The goal is not revenge, she continued. The goal is correction. The room grew quiet. Monica walked toward the large window overlooking the runway. Aircraft lights moved through the night like distant stars. People often ask how discrimination survives inside organizations, she said. The answer is simple. It survives when assumptions become habits. It survives when nobody challenges them. One executive asked softly, "What would you like us to do?" Monica turned back toward the room. "Raise the standard." The answer seemed almost too simple, yet everyone understood what she meant. Better training, better accountability, better leadership, better listening. Not because one influential person experienced poor treatment, but because no passenger should need influence to receive respect. Hours later, as the meeting concluded, Emily Torres received a message requesting her presence. Nervous but determined, she entered the room. Monica immediately stood and greeted her. "Thank you for coming." Emily smiled awkwardly. "I was not sure why I was invited." Monica gestured toward an empty chair. "Because people notice character." Emily sat down. "I only tried to do the right thing." Monica nodded. "Exactly." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Monica handed her a small card containing a direct contact number. Aurora Airlines needs more employees who understand that professionalism begins before a person's title is known. Emily looked down at the card, speechless. Across the airport, passengers from Flight 728 continued toward baggage claim, hotels, and homes. Most would never see what happened next. They would never attend the meetings, read the reports, or hear the executive discussions. But they would remember the flight. They would remember the woman who remained calm while others rushed to judge her. They would remember the moment assumptions collapsed under the weight of truth. And long after the details faded, one lesson would remain. Monica Hayes had not boarded that aircraft to prove her importance. She had boarded to reveal something far more important. Respect should never depend on a seat assignment, a job title, a bank account, or a first impression. It should be given because people are human beings. As Monica finally left the airport and stepped into the cool Seattle night, she thought about the words she had written earlier in her notebook. People reveal their character when they think nobody important is watching. Looking back at the terminal lights one last time, she smiled softly and added a final thought. The strongest leaders do not raise their voices. They raise the standard. And that standard would now reach far beyond a single flight, a single cabin, or a single evening. It would become the measure by which the entire company moved forward.